Hello and welcome back to BSG Webinars. I'm your host, Dan Carney, coming from my office in Eden Prairie, Minnesota. Thanks for joining us. This is our 14th episode. Future episodes are posted on our website, as well as a link to video recordings of our past episodes. The page can be found by going to bsgcraftbrewing.com and clicking on the webinars tile, or going directly to bsgcraft.com/webinars. Next week, we'll begin our Humulus U series, where we'll be having speakers from around the country talking everything related to hops. Next week, we'll begin with Jessica Reel of Double R Hop Ranches. We'll be giving us, excuse me, an in-depth look at the U.S. hop crop report. That webinar is up and open for registration, so be sure to sign up. We'll be announcing other seminars in the coming days, so be sure to keep an eye on our Facebook page, Instagram, and newsletter for more information. Now I'd like to welcome today's speaker, Todd Leopold. Todd is a distiller and maltster, as well as co-founder with his brother Scott at Leopold Brothers, based in Colorado. Today, Todd will be walking us through their new malt offerings through BSG. Throughout the webinar, please ask questions through the Q&A function, center of the toolbar at the bottom of your screen. After the presentation, we'll be opening up for questions. So with that, I'd like to introduce Todd.
Hello.
How you doing, Todd?
Wonderful. Just got 6 inches of snow out here in Colorado to help put out some of the fires that everybody's having out west. So we're better today than we were yesterday, that's for sure.
That's good. Well, if you'd like to just introduce yourself real quick, we will present a short video right after and introduce some people to some of your new malts.
Well, I'm Todd Leopold. I'm one half of the Leopold Brothers here in Denver, Colorado. We're just a couple weeks away from our 21st anniversary, and we're a distillery and malt house. I was a brewer for 20 years, and we've been floor malting for about 6 years now. And we're excited to finally be able to offer them to brewers and distillers with our new expansion and our partnership with Brewers Supply Group. So we're excited for everybody to get their hands on these malts.
Well, excellent. So yeah, we'll play a quick video here, and Todd will talk about all the malts kind of individually, and then we'll go on to asking some questions. So we can drop off and play this video for everyone.
Hi, I'm Todd Leopold from Leopold Brothers here in Denver, Colorado. We're a distillery and malt house. This is our 21st year of production now, and we make a little bit of everything here.
Can you tell me about your Distillers Malt?
Yeah, our Distillers Malt, we've been making that for years here because we need it to produce our spirits. So we make vodka, bourbon, several different varieties of rye whiskey. And we don't mash with outside enzymes. So what that means is, in the mash tun, we need to convert raw grains from starches into simple sugars. So you need a malt that is very, very high in diastatic power, has lots of beta-glucanase, has a lot of alpha amylase, beta amylase that's going to break those starches down quickly. So the way that you accomplish that is you're a little bit longer on the germination floor. You're synthesizing as many enzymes as you can, which with as high a protein malt as you can find. The protein, it's the building blocks for those enzymes. So you're on the floor for a little bit longer. And then in the kiln, when you're drying and removing all of that water from the green malt, you need to do everything you can not to denature enzymes. So what that means is you don't get any higher than 150 degrees on the kiln. So it's almost just, warm air. Hair dryers are hotter, basically. So it takes a lot longer to get all that water out and get the moisture content to around 5%. But basically what you have is an enzyme bomb, right? So it's loaded with diastatic power. It's very light in color. And because you're kilning it at such low temperatures, it's going to have a grassy note. It's really going to taste very much like raw barley. And what that does in our whiskeys is it makes it so that you get a grassy note in our bourbon and everything that we make. Why? Because we're using 20% distillers malt no matter what it is we're producing. So you'll see other producers that'll use 3, 4, 5% distillers malt. Really what that tells you is they're adding outside enzymes, which is fine, of course. But we can't get conversion using that low an amount. So 20% is really what was used back in the day, way before Prohibition even. When distillers were looking for a way to convert all of their starches, they needed to use a higher proportion. So when you see recipes for bourbon and rye production in the late 1800s, you see 20% is pretty standard. And of course, that winds up making our whiskeys taste different than a lot of the other distilleries' whiskeys because we're using such a high proportion. But that grainy, grassy note is much more reminiscent of Irish whiskey. And Irish whiskey, for those who don't know, uses a large proportion, 50% sometimes, of unmalted barley. So that grassy, light, almost effervescent note that you get in Irish whiskey, you're going to pick them up in our bourbons and our rye whiskeys. And we're offering them to other distilleries around the country now for the first time, and we think they'll really enjoy using it.
Can you tell me about the malted oats?
Yes, our malted oats is an interesting thing for me to make because the thought of intentionally adding a high proportion of malted oats into a beer is the opposite of what I was taught to do. Simply because when you use it in higher proportions, you're making something that's difficult to filter, right? And it's not necessarily very shelf stable compared with other beers. And when I left Siebel, I guess in 1996, the only thing malted oats was used in maybe would be an oatmeal stout or flaked oats or something like that. So we started making malted oats for whiskey because it's a traditional ingredient in Irish whiskey. So we've put a few barrels down that we haven't released just yet. It was an awful lot of fun to malt it. You get some wonderful flavors and texture and a distillate as a result of using malted oats. But for beer, you're using them to produce the hazies, right, that are so popular these days. What we're doing is we're taking Colorado oats. These are organic oats. The raw materials are, right, not the finished. We don't have organic certification on the finished product, but the raw materials are, and that's important because we're not using any desiccants on the oats that are grown for us. And desiccants are used to make it so that you're literally killing the oat plant while it's in the field. What that does is it basically, it's drying in place, right? It makes it so that you can harvest it at any time. But the problem with that, of course, is you're getting quite a bit of residual chemicals on the oats because you're not using it to kill weeds, you're using it to kill the oats themselves. So the dosing is very high. So what we do is we use organic oats that are grown for us just outside of Fort Collins at Hediger Farms. It's a really wonderful variety called Dancer that just germinates really beautifully. We're kilning at lower temperatures with it, so we're really looking at the high 1s to 2s for the final color and level bond. But you're still getting that nice kind of palate fullness that you're looking for in a hazy beer. But it also translates very, very well into distillate if distillers try and use it to make an Irish-style whiskey or to make a 4-grain bourbon or anything that people would want to use it for. But it's very fun for us to make because it's so different from barley. So the boys really enjoy getting that on the floor and getting it into bags.
Tell me about your pale malt.
Our pale malt is really an exercise in making sure we've got our Pilsner on one end of the spectrum where we're finishing off our kilning temperature below 180 degrees. You get that grassy note, you get that depth of flavor. And we don't want it to just be the same thing as a Pilsner malt, but your finishing temperature is a little bit higher. We really want to make sure that the color is entirely different. We really want to make sure the depth of flavor and the honey notes that you get are entirely different. So we're on the floor for longer, so we're germinating for longer. The barley is synthesizing precursors that when you apply the heat in the kiln, you're going to get those more special honey notes that drift into Munich and Vienna territory. So our finished color is usually somewhere between 3.5 and 4.5. Which is quite dark. relatively speaking, for a pale malt. But in my career, basically, when you were formulating a brew, you would put together your base malt, and then you would layer specialty malts to look to get the flavors from that. And I always thought, well, why wouldn't you just simply make that base malt more flavorful so you don't need to add those specialty malts or don't need to add as much? So what we're doing is we're germinating on a floor longer than we are with our Pilsner malts, so several hours, again, generating those precursors. And we're in the kiln, our finishing temperatures is 220 degrees. This is more in line with the way malt was made a couple hundred years ago, much darker, a lot more flavor. And malting in the, late 1800s all the way up through and past World War II, things were getting pale, more and more pale, which is nice if you're making a lager, but it's not necessarily what you're looking for in a pale malt. So what we do is we're longer on the kiln at that 220 degrees, and of course when you do that, it's going to denature enzymes. Really, you need about 70 dP to make sure you self-convert in a malt. So our target is between 80 and 100. What that does is having that lower diastatic power kind of opens up our hands in terms of temperature. So we can add more temperature. We can get more of those honey notes that I mentioned. You can get more biscuity notes. And that lower diastatic power also makes mashing much easier. So more than a few brewers I know will add carafoam or some type of malt product with the idea that they're having problems hitting their terminal gravity repeatedly. And the reason for that, in my opinion, they're using base malts that have 140, 150 dP, so the instant they mash in, their chance to create those dextrins almost evaporates in a matter of minutes because you're flooding the mash tun with so many enzymes, really a lot more than you need. And so brewers tend to counterbalance that with carafoam or something else where you're pumping the dextrins in to make sure that you're stopping at that residual sweetness that you're looking for. The lower diastatic power in our pale malt gives you more control. It gives you more time to get your step infusion together to make it so that you're presenting the yeast with the same carbohydrates every time. It gives you more control in the mash tun. And I really think it's something that brewers are going to enjoy using because of that, and also obviously because of the flavor and aroma. You just have to throw a few kernels into your mouth and you'll really understand after chewing on it for a bit, this is a different kind of pale malt, and this is more in line with the traditional floor malt that's been made for hundreds of years.
Can you tell me about your Pilsner Malt?
Yes, our Pilsner Malt we make with an eye towards lager production. So Helles, Doppelbock, Pils, that type of thing. And really the difference, for me anyway, between Pils and pale malt, the final kilning temperature is held below about 180 degrees. The reason you do that is you're trying to hold on to the grassy note that you get in a really nice two-row barley. And that grassy note is what you need to balance out those lager beers. And without it, in my opinion, just falls flat. So the way we make our Pilsner Malt, we're very cool in the steep tank, so we're in the mid-50s in the steep. We're on our germination floor that we hand turn in the 50s. So the process takes a little bit longer. The germination is a little bit slower, but it's also a bit more thorough. Just like all biological processes, when you pull back on the temperature, it slows everything down, and I think it helps promote a more even germination. So that when you get to the kiln, you've got nice low beta-glucans, so we're really looking around 100 for us, which means it's just going to fly through the lauter tun without any problem, but you're really preserving that unique grassy note that you're looking for in a Pilsner. The kiln that we use is a Doig kiln. Doig is an architect out of Scotland, and it has that very, it's kind of ubiquitous, or everybody kind of associates that malt pagoda look with Scottish distilling. And the reason is there's still a few of them that are left, but of course all malt houses used to have them back before we started getting into drum kilning and Saladin boxes for germination and all that kind of thing. But the reason that we use a Doig kiln is it is going to get a little bit of depth of flavor that you may not get in a drum. With a drum, it's rotating, every single kernel is getting the exact same temperature of hot air applied to it. But with a Doig kiln, you're obviously introducing warm air from the bottom. It's going up through the stainless steel plates, right? The slotted plates. It basically looks like a lauter ton bottom. And it's going to push up through about 3 feet of this green germinated barley that you're trying to dry. So as a result, the bottom layer is going to get a little bit more heat than the top. And of course, it's like this even in modern kilns. If you've visited some of the larger malt houses, there's going to be a little bit of unevenness of heat. It may be a degree or two, and you may not notice it in the color if you put the malt in your hand. But it's going to lead to a bit more depth of flavor. You're not getting every kernel the exact same amount of heat, so that when you brew with it, you're going to get, in my opinion, what's a bit more depth of flavor that I think you're really going to enjoy.
Can you tell me about your whiskey malt?
So our whiskey malt is really made with an eye towards making malt whiskey. So, using it in up to 100%, where we're not looking at high diastatic power. In fact, the opposite. We're looking at DP that's somewhere between 70 and 100, enough to self-convert, so you don't have to worry about that. It'll process in the lauter ton with no problem at all. But we're kilning it at very high temperatures. We're finishing it off at around 220 degrees, but we're also circulating air in the kiln the same way you would to make a Vienna or a Munich malt. Those are two of my favorite malts to use in my career. I was one of those people who didn't particularly care for crystal malt and tended to like the honeyed flavor that you get from Munich and the nuttiness that you get from a Vienna. And it went into a lot of the beers that I made, if not all of them. So I'd use a small proportion of it to make a Helles. I'd use a lot of Munich malt to make a red lager that we had, an unfiltered red lager that was all the rage in 1999 when we came out with it. Obviously, that's sarcasm. But it's kiln at much higher temperatures. You're getting nutty flavors. You're getting biscuit notes. You're getting a whole range of flavors where if you don't have to worry about getting that diastatic power above 100, you can really go after some interesting flavors that have more depth than just a base pale malt. And the base pale malt is what the distillers in Britain, for the last 100 years have been using, and kind of the difference between that style and American whiskey producers is so many American whiskey producers are former brewers like I am. And so to us, it seems a bit odd to use 100% just straight up pale malt for a recipe to produce a malt whiskey when you can get some wonderful flavors from Munich and Vienna, crystal malts and melanoidins and all the different malts that you get. And really that's what the whiskey malt represents. It represents, a color is going to land somewhere, the high fours, all the way up into the high fives, and really with a focus on flavor that's going to carry through into a distillate or a beer for those who get a little bit adventurous and have some fun with our malt.
Well, that was a lot of great information there. And we'll get back to some of that, but I have a couple of questions for you, just so we can get to know you better. So I kind of wanted to start with just tell us a little bit about your background, when and what brought you into the world of brewing in Michigan in 1999 and eventually moved to distilling in Colorado not long after.
Well, my brother and I decided we wanted to open up a brewery. We went to the unfortunately famous Columbine High School in Colorado. And at the time we put our business plan together in 1994, I'll never forget the number. There were 14 breweries in the Denver metro Boulder area. And we concluded that the market was saturated, which most people, of course, laugh at now because 14 breweries open up every 10 minutes these days. But we went up there. My brother went to Northwestern for his undergrad, and he would, they were in the Big Ten together with the University of Michigan, which of course is in Ann Arbor. And so he visited there to watch Northwestern get their butts kicked by Michigan and really, really liked Ann Arbor. So we decided to set up shop there. his background, Northwestern for econ, and then he got his master's from Stanford in environmental engineering. And he wanted to show people how to make a pollution-free factory, and a brewery seemed like a nice one, nice example to use. I graduated from the Siebel Institute in 1996. Then I went to Doman's after that, did some work there in some breweries and opened up the brew pub, and we specialized. So this was 1999. You kind of heard me joke about the unfiltered red lager that we made.
Yeah.
We made an unfiltered Schwarzbier. It wasn't exactly what people were interested in back then. But we were the closest part of the big house, which is the big football stadium. So we became a kind of a unwilling sports bar a little bit, at least a few weekends out of the year. And in 1999, we had such a big place, you could easily fit 300 people in there. We did live music there sometimes. And when you have a place that big in 1999, easily half of the people that would come through the door didn't like beer. You're right. So when you get groups of 20, groups of 30, we'd have whole sections of the law school come in. And so we turned into a place where you'd start your night or end your night, and you'd go uptown for cocktails, basically, right? Which isn't exactly the best business plan in the world. So the laws in Michigan at the time were much more restrictive, but basically we were set up as a manufacturing tasting room. So we weren't able to sell alcohol the way you could as a brew pub. In Ann Arbor, there weren't enough available liquor licenses. So the only option we had was to distill for ourselves. So we pulled a distilling license, a winemaking license. We made the sweet vermouth, the dry vermouth, the vodka, the gin. You know, basically we were one of the first, if not, I don't know if we were the first or not, but one of the first distillery pubs in the country. Yeah, that's really what kind of got us into the brewing industry. And then 2007, excuse me, somebody bought the building out from under us. We were trying to buy it that whole time, had a nice, successful business going. And somebody bought the building, and everybody knows what happened in 08. The market crashed. So the group that bought our building went bankrupt in 2008, but not before they kicked us out. So we decided to come back to Colorado, as I mentioned, where we grew up. But as you know, you can self-distribute in Colorado, which is huge in the spirits game, and beer too, in my mind. But in any event, you know, that allowed us to really kind of spread our wings. And we moved here in 08. The building that I'm in right now is now 6 years old, almost 7 years old. And this is where we started malting. And the malting was something that was left over, that old Siebel degree back then in 1996. I can't believe I'm saying back then. But half of the course was in malting. And of course, it's not like that anymore. It's just a much smaller section from what I've been told. But you know, I was there with some younger brewers from Old Dominion and Abita and Full Sail. And we were all in a bit of a panic as, you know, the weeks were rolling by. And we were just talking about barley, more malt, right, as we're going on. And weeks are rolling by, and we're like, my God, we have so much to learn. When are we going to talk about brewing? And we actually, you know, sat down at lunch with Bill Siebel. And, you know, my goodness, I was 25 when I was there. Huh. And, you know, not exactly the sharpest tool in the box. And so I'm like, why are we spending so much time on this malt? And he's just calmly and politely explained, you can't make good beer without good malt. So we've had all of this education sitting, and once we put together this new building, we started floor malting. And the floor malting was to take care of our own needs. So as I mentioned in the videos, to make our vodka and our bourbons and our rye. We've got world-class barley here because of the Coors family. They've been, you know, working with farmers for decades. And so really on my side, it's just a question of not screwing up the work that the farmers did, right? You know, beautiful low protein 2-row barley, and
right.
And taking advantage of that. And it gives me another lever to pull in terms of quality, so I can get the exact malt that we're looking for our distillates. And it's fun. Making malt is an awful lot of fun. We really enjoy doing it.
Well, that's kind of funny. You kind of answered my next question, where I was going to ask, you know, with brewing and distilling background, you know, what drove or inspired you to get into malting? Was it control of your product, or just, more of a passion project that grew into something more?
Right, both. Both. It's so much fun. You get the exact flavors that you're looking for, and you can adjust what you're doing in the malting and the kilning process when you're tasting the distillate coming off, or seeing the results of your whiskey 10 years later.
Sure.
And try and get the exact chocolate notes that you need. So, in the distilling industry, when we're talking about malts, think about using a higher kiln malts. Just a little bit goes an awful long way. So if you use just, out of a 2,000 pound grist charge, if you use any more than 5 or 6 pounds of, say, black patent or chocolate malt, it's going to get that acrid bitterness. It's going to taste like you're sucking on a coffee bean. So there's a lot more finesse involved in putting together the grist process than it is on the brewing side. But it's an awful lot of fun working with it, and the crew we have takes an awful lot of pride. It's a lot of work. It's very physical. It's very, it's both hot and cool. It's very hot in the kiln.
Yeah.
And it's obviously very cool on the malting floors. So, where we keep the floors at 55 degrees. So it's an absolute joy. We had, I think every day in Colorado in August was in the 90s. So everybody was thrilled. You want me to go rake malt? Great. So
well, now you have snow, so they're
no, they're gonna. How it's no difference in brewing and distilling. We just have something different to complain about, right?
Yep. So you mentioned Siebel, and I remember when I was in school, I did not remember everything after I left school. But how did you learn the art and science of malting? Did you continue sort of that education, or did you sort of get back into educating yourself on that?
Got back into educating myself. Domans did the same thing. Domans taught malting, and it was a big proportion. It wasn't as big as Siebel, so that was helpful. I worked just a couple days, enough to at least, see it and smell it at a brewery called Autenried. So I did get my hands on for a bit, but yeah, absolutely. I was actually pleased with how much I remembered from 25 years ago, once we got it going. But, when you understand the fundamental process, I keep telling the guys who, the amount of knowledge, for instance, that the folks at Coors have, and, New Belgium, we've done some beers with them, and Crooked Stave. The amount of knowledge they have is, can be pretty overwhelming for them. But, I have to remind them, you're learning so much every day from what it smells like and what it tastes like and what it feels like. And you can tell when things, it's just like a brewery.
Yep.
Most brewers I know run by sound, that pump doesn't sound right, or, it's a wonderful learning process when you're this hands-on. And when you're getting feedback, for us as a distillery, we're just about to bottle our 5-year-old bottle in bond bourbon this week, actually, for the first time. And you can taste the adjustments that we made to the malting process as we're going along. And that's an incredible education that you get, in that we're distillers as well as maltsters. You get, fairly instant feedback in tasting the distillate that you made for that week. And you also get long-term feedback, and okay, well, I'm looking for a little bit more honey flavor, or I'm looking for that grassy note that I unfortunately mentioned way too many times in those videos, I'm realizing in retrospect. But
well, when they're all mashed together, they
that's right,
sound repetitive. But no, that they were all very descriptive, good amount of information in each one. So one thing I'd like to bring up is you're currently a James Beard finalist in the category of Outstanding Wine, Beer, or Spirit Producer. Obviously, with COVID, the awards were delayed, so you still don't know if you've won.
Wow.
But, tell us a little bit more about how this came about,
Well, this is our third year in a row. Last year, Todd from Allagash Brewing won it. It's a national award, so you're lumped in with all distillers, all winemakers, and all brewers, which is a pretty daunting category. But this year we made it to the final 5. They actually just announced, you may have missed it this week, they're just canceling them altogether, unfortunately, this year. And Yeah, there are greater injustices in the world.
Right.
The restaurant industry and brew pubs and breweries too. Everybody's in such rough shape. I think they made the decision that, we have larger problems at hand than this. So I get it. It's quite an honor to make it this far when you see that list. And I think a lot of it is just, the gray hair that you see here. And they're just, when they start giving you these nods, it's just, we've just been around for a while, I guess. But the team's very, very proud, and it's nice to be recognized for, the things that you do. We've done a lot of firsts here. We did the first American Amaro, the first Fairnet, the first Maryland style rye. That's us. If you've seen those out and about, we resurrected that style. I think we're just getting recognized for, being as creative as we can, staying independent, which is a difficult thing, especially in the distilling industry, to produce, large quantities of whiskey as we do and not have, not say yes to Diageo and Brown-Forman and the other companies out there that are looking to buy you, and having to compete against these companies is, I'm sure the viewers understand, is not all that easy. So, yeah.
That's, if the quality comes out in those products, it's definitely going to come out in the malt. So
Absolutely. The two are tied together. And, as I said, it's just, it's a lot of fun in the sense that, I know what works, I know what doesn't work. As I've mentioned to you and the folks at Brewer Supply Group, I'm obviously, we're not a 150-year-old malt house. I'm pretty sure that Thomas and Sabina Weierman has forgotten more about malting than I've ever learned. But we do have a unique position in the sense that we do use what we make. And that's a very, very valuable thing. We understand how it performs, what flavors it gets. And we know the joy of creating spirits and beers.
Well, excellent. I want to shift over to some of our questions that viewers have brought in.
Okay.
We had one question asked that said, "Thank you, Todd. This is great. Can you tell us a little bit more about your zero waste system?" I think that's when you were referring to your Michigan.
Yes. Well, we're zero waste was a term that was used in the 90s before anybody had heard of the word sustainability. So when my brother left Stanford with his master's degree, it's been the #1 ranked environmental engineering school in the world for basically for forever. And what we were trying to do is make it so that nothing left the building at all. So we had a small greenhouse that was on site. We would use the rinse water from rinsing out kegs and fermenters that went into what's called an equalization tank, where we'd stabilize the pH. We had small little vacuum pumps off the blow-off tubes from the fermenters. Carbon dioxide obviously is brought off, and we just had a small vacuum pump that would pull it over into the greenhouse. It was just a frame with mylar inside, basically, with lights. And the tomatoes and plants consume carbon dioxide, obviously, but it only consumes it when the lights are on. So it's obviously not perfect. It's not quite like a carbon dioxide recovery system, right, that you see at larger breweries where, they're recovering, not quite all of it. You have to lose your heads and tails, kind of like in distilling, actually.
Yeah.
To get rid of those impurities and to reuse it. But a nice simple way of putting it here, we've got 3 solid waste streams. We've got our recycling, and that's mostly from glass coming in, glass, slip sheets, and plastic, from getting new glass that we're filling our spirits into. Then we've got compost. Compost is basically anything that the farm animals won't eat. So spent grains. And when we had we had a goat at a farm named Steve, who used to eat our absinthe waste, but that was the only animal we could find that would eat the leftover. It's got wormwood in it and coriander and a bunch of it. It's just a mess. But once we lost Steve, that goes to compost, but the rest of it goes to a farm. And then we've got actual trash. And for our plant, I guess it's about 50,000 square feet now with the Malt House edition. We've got 1 household size trash bin. And that's what we have for trash. Our water to wastewater ratio on the distilling side, is at less than 3 to 1. So we're really low on the water usage. That's in part, we have wooden fermenters. So instead of the cycle that you use for stainless, where your hot water rinse caustic, hot water rinse hot acid, cold water rinse sanitize, and sometimes post rinse, what we do is we pump our fermenters directly into the stills. We do one last water rinse and a push. We push that last bit of water into the stills, and then it's ready to refill. So it's a way to save an awful lot of water on that. We don't lauter, so we're distilling on grain, so we don't have any lautering losses at all. As you're lautering, world-class lauter ton, you get 95% plus efficiency. Some of the smaller units, you're at 80. For us, it's 100 because we're fermenting and distilling on the grain. And you have the added benefit of not having to climb into a hot lauter ton in the middle of summer, which I'm a big fan of. So there are lots of little simple things that we do to eliminate the chemicals and eliminate the things that we need. And one of the fun parts about touring our plant is you don't notice these things because they're not there.
Right.
So it's kind of a negative space thing where you're not necessarily seeing the things that we've done to make things a little bit more efficient. And it just feels like any other distillery or brewery that you work in. It's just that you're using less and fewer overall materials. And then also one of my brother's undergrad degrees at Northwestern was in industrial engineering. So that's all the queuing theory, touch things once, all that kind of thing. So the way that our plant is laid out, it's myself and 3 other gentlemen in production that handles all the different spirits that we have. And we make it a point of having fewer people and paying them more. So it's not just a better way for the environment, it's better financially because we're not using as much equipment and we're thinking things through as much as we can and try and hire talented and thoughtful people to come and work with us. That's how our plant is. That's the best way I could describe it without talking about it for 8 hours.
Very smart. Very smart. So next question, let's see here. Do you know the predicted spirit yield on the whiskey malt and or pale malt?
I'd have to email that off to you. There's a bit of a conversation that I'm having with some other malt makers as to what the assumptions are that people use. I can tell you that that on the whiskey malt, the dry basis extract is 81.5, and above on all the batches that we've ever run of that. So outside of saying high, I should be able to spout that out. But we've got the people who look at bushels per gallon. Then we've got the people that look at liters, and what we're trying to settle on for our spec sheet is what customers want. So if you don't mind, what's your preferred method? And maybe that'll help guide us to what it is we put on our COA.
Sure.
So that you can figure that out.
Well, excellent. We'll get back to that offline on that question. So we'll connect you with Ilya. We also had Mike Brennan, who I think you've met in Seattle. He said you spoke a bit about regional malts and especially your whiskey malt. I know your video bit talked about your approach, but can you discuss more about how a commercial distiller could best utilize your whiskey malt?
Sure. Well, there's a few things that we did in there that are a bit different. So first of all, we're a little bit longer on the floor. We're trying, as I mentioned, to create more precursors to get some more flavors out of it so that when you apply the heat to the amines and the sugars that you have in there, you're going to get more interesting flavors. The thing that we do that's very different at our shop, and this is something that's very common in Scotland, we do a secondary fermentation. So we'll do a primary fermentation that'll be 72 hours. We do relatively low gravity. We're starting at 12, I think in Plato. So we'll start at 12 Plato. We'll end at 0. It'll basically have almost no residual sugars whatsoever. We're mashing to avoid those dextrins. And after those 72 hours, most commercial distillers go straight into the stills. We don't. So the wooden fermenters that we have are placed by windows. Our building is designed to take air out of that building instead of going through your filtration system the way most food plants are designed. our air intake is just outside of the fermenters. So when it's nice out, and that did not qualify here in all of August, it was too damn hot. But when it starts to cool down, we open up the windows and we're pulling air out of our garden across the fermenters and up out the top. What we're trying to do is get more wild yeast and bacteria to go to work and to populate those wooden fermenters that we're using. But the bulk of the bacteria is going to come from the mash itself, right? Because when we're adding the malt together with the either boiled or close to boiling for the corn and the rye, when we're talking about bourbon, we're adding at 144, 62 degrees centigrade. So we're not killing the lactobacillus that lives on the malt. And it's something that people don't really talk about, but it's been a new thing now. I can explain this to brewers because it's how kettle sours are made, right? You've got lactobacillus that's on that malt. And what we're doing is we're taking advantage of that fact. So after 72 hours, the yeast is done. And the point I'm trying to get, we have elevated amounts of free amino nitrogen in our whiskey malt. That's intentional. The reason we're doing that, we're trying to make it so that we've got food for that, the bacteria to go to work. Now, normally as a brewer, in a perfect world, you want to completely consume 100%, every last scrap of that free amino nitrogen, which is impossible, but that's the goal, to make your beer a little bit more shelf stable. But in distilling, you don't need that. So what we're trying to do is make sure we've got zinc, make sure we're staying away from oxygen, we're not disturbing the surface, and we're encouraging that lactobacillus fermentation. So our lactobacillus fermentation that's coming from our malt is so aggressive, you'll see a white floor, what brewers will call floor, I guess, on top of it. That pH drops all the way down into the low 3s. And the reason that we're doing that for distillation is there's a simple reaction that occurs in the barrel. So when you have organic acids in that distillate, so when the lactobacillus is consuming compounds, it's giving off organic acids.
Mm-hmm.
Those organic acids in the distillate in alcohol form, when you drop that into a barrel, is going to react over time with oxygen to create esters. So that's a long-winded way of explaining the whiskey malt that we make is designed to get you a flood of lactobacillus in there if you choose to add hours to your fermentation. So if you've ever seen papers on Scotch, Scotch production, you'll see discussions of how many hours it is. Okay, how many hours is their fermentation? What they're trying to communicate to you is how many hours did they let that lactobacillus go?
Sure.
How much organic acid are you getting into that mash? It's going to create those esters. And that's really the big difference in Scotland. So in Scotland, for brewers who don't know, there's really only 3 yeasts that are used for the large companies. The M-Strain and the MX are by far the 2 biggest used yeast strains. But you're getting all these different flavors. Where are those flavors coming from? The lactobacillus that's going to work. And everybody has different strains. Brewers, I'm sure, know that some are homofermentative and will make lactic acid. Some are heterofermentative, and they'll also, I almost got that backwards, will create lactic acid and acetic acid. And when you're looking at it from the perspective of a distiller, acetic acid is going to have all kinds of esters that follow underneath it at using that acetic acid as a base. So isobutyl acetate is an easy one. Isobutyl acetate tastes like stone fruit or raspberries, and to me, it's kind of the hallmark of a lot of the Kentucky distillers, get that little bit of lactobacillus in their operation. But the idea behind that whiskey malt, we're trying to make it so where you get that malt matters. Yeah. Where you get the barley matters, because that's how you're introducing that organism. And brewers are learning this as they're starting to make sour beers and even just simple kettle sours. Not all malt is created equally, and you're getting different amounts of lactobacillus and you're getting different strains of lactobacillus, and they're going to contribute different acids to that sour beer. The only difference in distillation is those organic acids are going to turn into esters after they've been in the barrel for 5, 10, 15 years. I hope that answered the question.
Yeah, that was pretty neat too. You put it in more of a layman's terms for me, and that's a lot of good information. One shift in gear here, we saw the bags in the video. Very nice, by the way. They commented. But are you also able to fill totes and bulk trucks if needed?
Yes, we've got us. We have a bulk bag filler. It's it's something that take a bit of time to work out, so it's not off the shelf just yet. The bags actually, for brewers who have worked with malt bags before, we're trying to avoid mispicks. So we make it so that each of the different types of malt are very vibrant colors to keep from mixing them up. I always hated that. And sometimes you get a young brewer who would forget to save the bags after you mash in, to make sure to do a bag count and make sure you're actually pulling the right thing. And I don't know any brewer who hasn't at one point pulled something that they thought was, crystal and it turned out to be Cara or whatever, that you wind up pulling the wrong bag. So speaking for ourselves, we try and idiot-proof things because everybody's an idiot at some point or another in production. Yeah, the hours are long, mistakes happen, and you try and minimize them as a matter of process as best as you can. But that was the idea behind giving those colored bags, to make it nice and easy so that you know what it is going into your mash tun just by a simple glance. It also makes it easier to, when you're looking and doing inventory, what that is. Trying to simplify things as much as possible.
Well, we have no more questions as of this point, but if anybody else wants to add anything, we are open here and have Todd's attention. So otherwise, we can close it down here. And, I do want to mention that, we're excited to see what some of the customers come up with some of your products. This will definitely open new grounds for people, and want to let everyone know that the malts will be available at the end of next week at both our Denver and Shakopee warehouses. So contact your sales manager and CSR for more information, or you can go to our website and see the malts there. As we get more content from Todd and everything, we always like to add it back to our website. So there will always be new and fresh information, hopefully every time you go back. So yeah, I think with that, Todd, appreciate you joining us today and taking time out of your busy schedule. I know you're a hard man to wrangle down sometimes. So.
Well, it's I think everybody's pretty busy these days with everything. I did see one last question pop through, somebody asking about milling. We do have a hammer mill on site. And again, it's one of those things where we would just need some heads up. The only way we could do that would be to keep from killing the guys who have to fill the 55 pound bags. We can mill into super sacks. So if that's something that people are looking to do long term, we can do that. Yeah.
Well, excellent. Well, you go enjoy the snow.
I will, absolutely. As I said, I'm just happy the damn fires are calming down a little bit here. And if anybody's in California, our thoughts are with you on that. But thank you so much, everybody, for taking the time, and thank you, BSG, for hosting me. Greatly appreciate it. Look forward to seeing you guys making some beers and spirits out of our work.
All right. Well, thanks, Todd. Everybody, thanks for joining us today. And if you didn't get any questions in that you wanted to, please send them to webinars@bsgcraft.com. We'll work with Todd to get you some answers. So. And remember, you can register for future webinars on our website at bsgcraft.com/webinars, or go to BSG Craft Brewing, and there's a tile right on the homepage. So from everyone at BSG Leopold Brothers, thanks for tuning in. I'm Dan Carney, and we will see you around.
Cheers.
Cheers.